Hey class. All right, so we're going to continue the discussion around subdividing complex geometries, complex surfaces. In the last video, we created a curtain system around this double curved surface and started to look at the different types of mullions and curtain panels and the different manipulations that you can do within a curtain system. In this video, we'll be going over divide surface, the divide surface tool, and show you different types of patterns and panel orientation, panel layouts that you can do to more detail and break down your complex geometry, whatever kind of forms you may be developing and designing in studio, that you can then break down into structural systems, into facade systems, shading devices, or whatever different types of panelized structures that you guys can think of. So we can go ahead and delete the system itself. If we go in and edit in place, if we select the curtain, if we select the complex surface, and this only pops up if you're in the conceptual massing editing environment. Okay, you cannot do this in your regular project environment. So make sure that you edit in place the mass and then select the whatever geometry or whatever surface you want. And up at the top next to the create form is a divide surface. If you select that, it'll break down that surface into a series of subdivisions. It defaults to a more orthographic pattern. But what you can do is, under this drop down, instead of the different curtain systems that may be living in your project, what it's going to give you are all these different patterns that you can create. So let's just select triangle bent. If we do that, it creates a subdivided surface of triangles that we can then use as a starting point to create a custom facade family. All right, so let's see. So with this, so basically all of these are here to show you what kinds of patterns you can create with the divide surface tool, but they don't really do much, right? They're just showing you the different patterns and what they're going to look like on your specific surface. What you got to do is create a custom family around it. Okay, so to do that, you actually have to go and let's finish the mass first, and then go to your file tab up at the top left, file, new, family, and then I'm going to change this to details so you can see the name. So we're going to select this curtain panel pattern-based family. These are specific to the patterns that are created with the divide surface tool, and we can create different kinds of panels or mullions with it. So it brings up this window, and it starts off just as your typical rectangle. But what you can do is select the blue grid that's on the outside of these 4 points. Select the grid, and up at the top right under properties, if you go to the drop down, all of these patterns are the same exact patterns that you can find in the divide surface tool. So we'll start off with a pretty easy one. Let's do triangle bent. So if you select that, it's going to show you all of the different control points and lines that you need to then create your custom family around, and ultimately associate this specific family with a triangle bent surface in your project. So to do that, the most simple way to create a panel with this is to select the outside boundary of the geometry that you're selecting. So it's highlighted in this kind of green reference line. And if you hover over it, it should select all 3 or however many sides your specific panel has. If you select it, it'll give you a create form tab up at the top, and you can select that. And it'll give you 2 options, and I think we've covered it before, but these 2 buttons, if there's more than one way to create a geometry from the line work that you selected, it'll populate these tabs. And in my experience, they've sometimes popped up in weird places. So if they don't show up down here, look for it somewhere else in your window. But we want a panel with the actual thickness. So if you select that, it'll basically extrude those lines up. And then it'll give you different sides that you can then manipulate. Now, they're driven by, remember that these outlines, like this triangle, these points, they're all going to be changing based upon the geometry and the breakdown of your surface. So you do need to have these tied to any geometry that you create. You want to have them tied to either the points or the line, the reference line that's on the base file. So we just extruded this. What you can do is select the top surface, and you can change the, let's do 6 inches. So we can just drop that down. You can obviously manipulate it with the Boolean toggle. And now that we have that surface, the other thing you can do, if we go in, if you tab in and select the entire geometry, you can also go over to the right and associate a material to it. The other thing, and what I typically do, especially in families, is I don't necessarily associate a material to it within the family editor, but I go in to the little tab next to it, and I click that gray little button. That brings up the family parameter. Go down to the bottom with this page with the star in the top left. If you select that, it'll bring up this guy. And this is where you can create different parameters. So just like in the previous video, we could change the thickness, we could change the angle, we could change the offset. Those are all parameters, and you can create those parameters within this editor. So for this specific one, we're just setting a material parameter that we can then manipulate in the project itself. And then you can choose whether you want that to be a type parameter. So if it's a type parameter, then you can only change the one, how do I explain this? You can only change it once, and it will propagate throughout every single panel that's of the same family. So every panel that is created from this family will have that material. If you do instance, then you can go in and select individual panels and change those materials. It's definitely specifically for material, it's better to just do type, because especially with a larger facade system or curtain system like this, you're going to have a lot of panels, and you don't want to go in and have to manipulate every single individual one. So for this specific parameter that we're creating, just hit, actually let's do this. Let's type in panel material just so that we can distinguish that that's the specific one we created. So make sure it's type, and then it automatically associates it as a material and finish parameter because we click this button from the material and finishes. So hit OK, hit OK. And now if we go in and select that geometry, the material is grayed out, and that means that it's associated to a parameter. So it's a pretty simple one. I want to show you how this works with the family, or the surface, the divide surface that we created. So if we go in up to the top and save this file under a specific name, let's save it in my folder. Let's say current panel 1. Hit save. Then we're going to go up to the top and load this back into our initial project. All right. Now, it doesn't do anything at first, and the reason is that basically it comes in as its own divide surface pattern. So if we go and select the mass and go to edit in place, if we select the divided surface and do the drop down, you get your typical triangle bent, which is just your divided surface, just showing you what it would look like. But underneath that is the actual family that we just created. So they show up here as basically different patterns, and when you select it, and we might reduce the amount of panels we have so this goes a little faster. Then it freaks out, apparently. So this is some of the issues with Revit. Gotta love it. Let's go edit type. So if we go to edit type, here's our panel material. Then we can go in and associate a material that's already loaded in the project to this specific panel. And then let's go in and reduce these divisions. So with divide surface, instead of doing like with a curtain system, you can specify 5 foot wide panels by 10 foot wide, or maximum spacing 5 foot. With the divide surface, you're restricted to an even amount of divisions of the surface. You can change the grid rotations, you can change where it starts and finishes, but press OK. This is very interesting. So one of the things, it's probably due to the fact that this is a triangle bent, and it's just having a really hard time rectifying the geometries with the bent. So if we finish mass and we go back to our current panel, let's go in and delete this guy. And let's change it from triangle bent to triangle flat. And do the same exact thing, create form. Change this to 6 inches and associate, select the panel and associate it with the panel material parameter that we set up before. Save it and load it back into our project. Definitely overwrite, so this will probably disappear. Oh, there we go. Oh, lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Can never work right the first time, can it? Yeah, so it's having difficulty rectifying the half panels that we're creating. created a couple more when we redid it. For some reason it's not liking this one. So what you can do, you can actually go in, tab in, actually select the individual panels themselves. You can delete them if you want. Know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna create a much simpler surface. Still has some curvature to it, but is made from true curves. See if that helps at all. The more complex of geometry that you create, more problems you're going to have within Revit. Now, you may find, or when we start getting into Revit, or excuse me, Rhino inside and start to do some more scripting, we'll have a lot more control and we can explore curtain divisions. But for right now, we are limited to what we can do within the Revit toolbox. So select the surface, divide surface. Let's first change this to a smaller division count, 6 and 6. U and V grid is basically just the X and Y that follows the surface vectors. Scroll down, let's select the curtain panel 1. And it really does not like that 1. Alright, well, close enough, right? So we can just cut off these edges. So that's how we can create different curtain panels and in the different patterns that are created from divide surface. But you can also do a lot more with it. So if we finish our mask and go back to our family, our curtain panel pattern-based family. The other thing we can do, if we go in, we already have our panel. What we can do is, you can't right-click and hide because it's a family, so you can't hide it forever. Like it's gonna have to show up eventually when you load it into the project. So it does allow you to temporarily hide the element, so you can work on other stuff. So what we're gonna do is show you guys how to create a mullion around the boundary of the panel. So what we're gonna do is we're essentially gonna sweep. So we're going to create a profile that then uses this green perimeter curve as a rail, essentially, and sweep it around the perimeter, creating a profile geometry. So to do that is a little, not necessarily complicated, but there's some steps that goes along with it. So what we want to do is use our point element, and we're going to do this a lot. Use our point element, click onto and make sure that the line itself lights up blue. Select that guy, and then what happens when you place a point on a reference line is it actually creates a plane that is perpendicular to the direction of the reference line. So what we want to do is actually draw our Mullion profile along or on top of that plane. So what we can do is go up to set, then hover over our point and select it. And then just to make it easier, let's do a circle. Actually, you know what? Let's get a little complex. Let's use inscribed polygon. 6 sides, so that's fine. And then, yep, so our placement plane is on our reference point. If we just draw this guy, make sure that it's actually being drawn on our plane by just panning around, making sure it's in line with all that. And then what we do to sweep it around is we'll select the actual section itself, and then select the boundary plane, and then hit create form, and it automatically will sweep around and create that geometry. And the nice thing is, if all of those lines are connected, it will actually create these joined forms, and it will actually update depending on what way the surface manipulates the division. It'll adjust based on that. So now that we have this, we can associate another type of material to it. So let's do Mullion material. And for the sake of showing the difference, let's make this one an instance parameter, just for guys or anyone who didn't quite understand my explanation of it. So Mullion material instance parameter, hit OK, and then we can reset the temporary hide isolate down at the bottom. Create the panel, and since our panel is a little bit thicker than our Mullion, what we can do is select the top face, and we can just tell it to move down. The other thing that we can do, going along with parameters, is we can actually create parameters based on dimensions. And all we need to do is select a part of the geometry of the panel, or whatever geometry we're trying to set a parameter for, and any referenced dimensions that you can manipulate, it'll have this little dimension graphic next to the numeric value of it. If you click that, it makes a permanent dimension off of that geometry. And then what you can do with that is select it, and then up at the top under this labeled dimension, you can add parameters to it. So right now there's nothing under there because we haven't created any dimensional parameters yet. But if you select this window next to it with the star, create parameter, you can then create different parameters for it. So panel depth, not depth, automatically associates with dimensions, and you can see all the different group parameters it can be. And then here is type. Let's do instance. So this is one thing, like, if we were setting up a script and we had a different gradient script associated with it, we could set up the thickness parameter and associate the different gradients, the different gradated numeric values to the depth parameters, and vary the depth of the panels across the entire facade, creating like a nice gradient pattern, like extrusions across the surface, which we can do once we get into scripting. But now that we have all of those set up, let's go ahead and save this one more time and load it back into the project, overwrite the existing version. All right. And then we can see that our mullions have been created. Some of the joints aren't as nice. They depend on the tangent of the panel itself. But for the most part, they get pretty close. They get pretty nice. And then what you can do, so go in, edit type. Why can't I? Oh, I was wondering, so I tabbed in and I was wondering why I couldn't change the instance parameters that we set up, the Mullion material and the panel depth. The reason why I can't do that is because you can't edit the different panels that we set up unless you go in to the conceptual mass environment. So if we edit in place, then tab in and select an individual panel, then we can go in and change the Mullion material. So this is the difference between type parameters, which you have to go to edit type and change, versus instance parameters. And I'll show you a little bit. So we go in, select that, edit type, and then change this panel material to, let's say, glass. Hit OK. All right. Then that changes all of the panel types, even in the other surface. That changes every single panel type to panel material to glass. Now, if we go in and we tab into a specific curtain panel and change the Mullion material to, let's say, copper, since we've already used that today, it only changes the Mullion material for that specific panel. And we can go in, we can tab in, select multiple panels, change that copper. But once again, it only changes for those specific panels. Same thing with the thickness parameter that we set up. I change this to 2 feet. It only changes the depth of that panel, not across the entirety of the system. All right. So this is just a really quick way to create a current system with different geometries. You'll be using the curtain panel pattern-based family in the out-of-class assignment, which I highly suggest you guys start in class, because if you run into any questions, you'll definitely want to ask. Okay, so just be sure, as always, if you have any questions, if you run into any issues, please feel free to reach out, to email me, and we will work through any of the issues that you guys have. All right? Thanks.